I'm very happy to introduce you today to Ernesto Javier Cordero Arroyo, who's a very prominent politician in Mexico, affiliated with the PAN party. Ernesto was one of the front runners for the Mexican presidency in the 2012 elections, and he's now president of the Mexican Senate. You may wonder where Senator Cordero received his excellent training to undertake all these accomplishments. He did his undergraduate degree at ITAM, which is one of the top universities in Mexico. And then afterwards, he went on to do graduate study in the economics department here at Penn. Just about the time when I arrived to Penn, actually. So his life as a doctoral student changed, though, when President Calderon appointed him to be his social development secretary, and he went back to Mexico. And later, he was also appointed to be finance secretary. Over the years, Senator Cordero has played a very important role in promoting social development in Mexico. For example, he greatly expanded the coverage of social programs, such as the Oportunidades conditional cash transfer program that helps, about 20% of the families in Mexico right now. He introduced new anti-poverty programs targeted at the elderly. He led initiatives to increase access to electricity and to improve infrastructure in homes. When he was finance secretary, he also implemented policies that contributed to Mexico's economic recovery. He modernized taxpayer systems and increased the tax base. And he continues to be a very strong supporter of social development policies today. So we're very happy to welcome Senator Cordero here today. Back to Penn campus.
Thank you very much, Professor. Well, good afternoon. I'm very glad to be here at Penn again. Going back home, it's always a great thing. I spent 5 years in Philadelphia from 1995 to 2000, and we have a great time. Enjoy it, take advantage of it, and I'm very glad to be here again on campus and to face a crowd of Penn students. It's always very rewarding and very stimulating for me. So I'm going to give you an overview of the Mexican economy. I'm going to be fast in order to leave some time for some questions and answers. I apologize about my English. I haven't been able to speak English in a long time. Right now, I only speak to Mexican politicians, and believe me, it's not as technical as this stuff. So, let me begin. Let me give you a brief introduction of the Mexican economy, then talk about an overview about the economic performance and living conditions in Mexico right now. Then go to the economic outlook, what is the forecast for Mexico, and then the agenda to promote growth in Mexico, and then do some final remarks. The purpose of this lecture is try to move a little bit away from the commonplace about all the conventional knowledge about my country and try to portray the real data. What is the real situation of Mexico with real, strong, and hard data? And let me tell you that in Mexico, we have done the homework in Mexico. It has been more than 25 years when we learned the lesson in the hard way, where we have several crises. And because of that, Mexico learned how to handle the economy in sound way and in the good way, with discipline, with prudence, and now we are getting the results from that. The Mexican economy is strong, has a very high potential, and is stable. And I should be very, very surprised if the world have a surprise with respect to the Mexican economy. And that's a good thing, and that's, I think, that the most valuable lesson of the Mexican case in the last 30 years. So let me begin with economic growth. Mexico has, this is the graph of the economic growth of Mexico, from 1988 to 2013. This is the last number for the Mexican economy. You have read a lot about that Mexico has very disappointing economic growth rates. That's not necessarily true. the potential of the Mexican economy, and Mexico has been able to grow at 4 and 5%. The problem is when you average these recessions here. And if you average these recessions here, of course, the arithmetic average is going to be lower. But Mexico has been able to grow at 5, at 6, at 7, 5, 5, 5, 4, 3, and now, well, we have a very humble 1.3%. But here the lesson is that Mexico has been able to grow at decent rates. What is the problem here? That we have, in the middle, 3 recessions here. 2 of them generated abroad Mexico. This is the crisis of 2009. And one of the 1995 crisis, yes, we have to accept full paternity of the crisis, the tequila crisis of 1994. Okay? But if you take away these periods, you could see that the Mexican economy has been able to achieve decent growth rates. Now, what happened in comparison between Mexico and the United States? You could see that when the Mexican economy is in an expansion phase, we usually grow more than the United States, probably 2 points more than the United States. You could see it here, you can see it here, and now you could see here that in this particular year, we grow less than the United States, even than the Mexican economy was in expansion. And as you know, I was the Secretary of Finance in the previous administration. Now I am part of the opposition, and it's not elegant to say a lot of things about the new administration, so I'm not going to say a lot of things, just that there is a learning curve here, and again, I think that Penn is definitely a better option than MIT with respect economic policy. Okay, so what's the structure of the Mexican economy? Again, some people tend to believe that Mexico is an exporter of raw materials, commodities, primary goods. That's not true. Mexico is a very strong exporter, but basically what we export are manufactures. Here is, in this, where is it? Yeah. The total good export for selected Latin American countries. So there's a huge difference. For example, if you see manufactures here, it's the total amount of manufactures in our export portfolio. You could see that Mexico, our export rely heavily in manufactures, 81%. Only 19% are primary products and other transactions, including oil. Mexico is very strong exporting oil, but even with that, 81% of our exports are manufactures. You could see that there is no other Latin American country that is even close of what's going on in Mexico. Brazil, it's half and half. Argentina, it's half and half. Chile is 63 manufacturers, 37 primary products. Colombia, 33. Peru, 31. So basically, we are very strong and powerful exporting manufacturers. And the second important characteristic and feature of the Mexican economy is that these exports are high-tech or medium-tech manufacturers. So you could see, for example, the case of Mexico, medium and high-tech manufacturers accounts for 78% of our total manufactures. Right? This is a very important difference between the Mexican economy and the other Latin American emergent economies. You could see, for example, Chile, 88% are natural resource-based manufacturers. Right? The case of Mexico is 78 is high-tech and medium-tech manufacturers here. So the rest of the Latin American economies, basically, their exports are commodities. And that also explains why the performance of the Mexican economy in the previous years, when we have a windfall in the commodity prices in the international markets, was not reflected in the growth rate of the Mexican economy. Chile, Colombia, Peru, Brazil, they really have the wind tail from the good prices in the international markets for commodities. Mexico didn't have it because what we export are not commodities. Mexico, and there are some things that people don't know, but for example, Mexico is the first or the most important destination of foreign direct investment in the aerospatial industry. In Mexico, we do not design planes, but in Mexico are built all the components to make a plane fly. Beginning from the engines, the turbines are done in Mexico, the computers, anything is done in Mexico to make a plane fly. So for example, that's a manufacturer, that's a high technological manufacturer. Well, before BlackBerry went into trouble, Mexico was the first producer of smartphones in the world, for example. So that's the kind of manufacture that we export. And that provides the Mexican economy a huge robustness to external shocks. So that's also an important thing to mention. Now, because of this, I'm talking about the competition here, but in some cases they are acceptable. And this is a joint venture between Harvard University and MIT. And they have a very strange laboratory who make strange things about economics. And one of the outcomes of this lab is the Atlas of Economic Complexity. And they create an indicator of how sophisticated and complex is an economy. Being 0, the more complex economy, the more complex structure, and as far as you advance on the scale, you are getting less and less complex. And they go further. The econometrics is a little bit lousy, but there is some correlation, at least they show some correlation between this economic complexity index and future per capita economic growth. And they claim that there's a positive correlation. The smaller the complexity index, the larger is going to be the future per capita economic growth. And in the case of Mexico, Mexico is the best Latin American country ranked in this atlas. So the Mexican economy is the most sophisticated and complex economy in Latin America. I know that comparisons are horrible, but try to understand me. I'm going to apologize here. But Mexico is also an example of a country that is destroyed by international media, that we have a very bad press in a lot of respects. So when we are abroad and we are facing a crowd like this, we tend to overreact and try to make our case. So I'm going to rely a lot in comparison. So we have all the BRIC countries here, and you could see that Mexico is better ranked than any of the BRICS countries here. Okay? These are data for 2011, probably data from 2009 and 2010. Now, the financial sector in Mexico. So Mexico is an exporter, export manufacturers, high-tech and medium-tech manufacturers. How is the financial sector in Mexico? The financial sector in Mexico is very strong. It's a well-capitalized banking system. When we have all this problem in 2009, when regulation and supervision get stronger, Mexico was probably one of the first countries in the world that were able to fulfill the new requirements. Because after the tequila crisis, by our own conviction, we put together a very well supervised and regulated banking system. So for us, all Basel III, all the new regulations in the banking system, we have already enforced them 10 years ago. So for us, there was no problem with that. So we have a well-capitalized banking system. We have a strict regulation and close supervision. We were the first country in the world to have a financial system stability council that follows the performance of the economy and detects any possible risk that could be in the horizon. And of course, we have a very low country sovereign risk. If you follow this very complex chart, Mexico has the lowest sovereign risk measure as the CDS index as any other emerging country. Important part is that we have a sound public finances. Our ratio debt to GDP is 36% of GDP, that it's very low. And our debt profile is improving every year, longer maturity and lower rates. And you will see here the yield curve for the Mexican economy. And this is very important to mention because just 12 years ago, it was impossible to construct this curve because there were no data. We were not allocating bonds with a longer maturity than 3 years. So this was non-existent only 12 years ago. Now, we can build a complete curve, very important. For example, this bond here is a centennial bond. We were able to allocate in the market a centennial bond. That is, we ask for money and we will be repaying it in the next 100 years. So that's, for an emergent economy, this is outstanding because we are used that nobody lends us money for the next 48 hours. And now we were able to allocate a bond for the next 100 years. So, with respect to human development, Mexico has also improved a lot. This stability in economic terms has provided the Mexican government with enough money and enough resources to have an aggressive social policy, at least in the past. And that reflects in the Human Development Index. That's another thing. It's common wisdom to say that Mexico is a very unequal country, that it's very poor, and that it's facing social challenges. That's true. Mexico is facing social challenges, but definitely is not a poor country. And you can see the Human Development Index, that it's computed by the United Nations Development Program, and this index considers 3 things: income, life expectancy, and education attainment. And you could see that Mexico performs quite well here. Yeah. We have better living conditions than Brazil, than China, than South Africa, than India, and we are very close to the living conditions in Russia. Usually when you think about an emerging economy, a Latin American economy, you not usually think that the living conditions are in Russia, for example. So this makes the case that even that Mexico has huge challenges in front of us, we have been able to attain some prosperity for the population. Income and inequality. Again, if you compute the GDP per capita adjusted by PPP, you could see that the income per capita is $15,000 in the Mexican economy. Above Brazil, about China, India, and very close to Russia. So again, comparisons are horrible, but just to make the case that when the BRICS were the darlings of the markets, there are some other countries, Mexico, Turkey, South Africa, that are doing things also in very good standing and deserve international attention. Income inequality for Mexico. Also, we tend to claim that Mexico is the most unequal country in the world. Probably, but that's not completely sure. And here we have done some efforts to reduce the Gini index from 52 to 47, and hopefully we will do a better job in the future. Poverty alleviation, that's the other thing. People tend to believe that half of Mexican population is in poverty. What's the real situation here? Well, I'm going to use the only international comparison that could be done, that it's the indicator used by the World Bank, that it's the percentage of the population living with less than $2 per day. And according to the World Bank, that's extreme poverty. If you use that indicator, Mexico has 5% of the population under extreme poverty. Chile has 3%, Thailand 4%, Brazil 11%, China 27%, South Africa 31%, Why I am using this indicator? We have a problem in Mexico. Sometimes when you do the things correctly, they are not appreciated by the general public. And that's exactly what happened in Mexico with respect some very important institutions that measure poverty in Mexico. So we have a government agency that measures poverty in Mexico, and they are very technical, very sophisticated, and they have a very strict consideration while they measure poverty, right? So there is no other country in the world that measures poverty in such a strict way. And when you do that, right, the measures are not comparable with some other countries. And for example, I think that they are doing a very good job, but they are very strict with respect the requirements that they ask to be in poverty or not, right? So Mexico, our own measures claim that we have probably 12%, 13% of the population under extreme poverty. And probably that measure is right, but it's not comparable with some other countries. So here I use a comparable measure with some other countries to claim that Mexico is a country with huge social challenges, but we have been advancing very fast in the last years. The economic outlook. Well, let me finish with the diagnostic. And now, what is the risk atlas? I think this is very important. If you want to take a decision with respect to a country, you have to pay attention where are the clouds in the horizon. Let me use two classifications, external risk and internal risk. With respect to external risk, the main challenge that we are facing is what is going to happen with the Fed's reduction of long-term asset purchases. What is going to happen with the monetary policy in the United States? And this is going to have important implications for the Mexican economy. Why? Because if the quantitative easing reduction is very fast, we are going to have less liquidity in the international markets. Less liquidity in the international markets means capital outflows. The money is going to flow away from the emerging markets, Mexico included, and going back to the United States. That is going to create a pressure on interest rates. That is going to create also pressure on the exchange rate depreciation that we already have seen it. And that is going to create inflationary pressure in Mexico. So this is something real that could happen, and that certainly is going to have an impact on the Mexican economy. In Europe, the risk is they are having a slow growth and low inflation, and the fragility of the banking systems that they haven't solved it yet. So what is going to be the potential implications in Mexico? We are going to decrease our exports demand, right? Mexico, our exports, 80% of the destination of the Mexican exports is the United States. But 20% goes mostly to Europe and to Asia and Latin America. So it's also going to impact us. And also, I think there is a very, very small risk of financial contagion. It is well addressed in the banking supervision, in the banking regulation, but you have to take it into consideration. And China. If China has slower growth than we are expected, that I'm sure is going to happen. It's not possible to keep growing 2 digits. It's not possible. So what's going to happen? Well, that's going to decrease our export demand. And also, very important, it's going to have an important impact on some other Latin American countries, Brazil, Chile, Colombia, that export a lot to China. And therefore, there's another additional and indirect reduction of our export demand. Our internal risks. Well, here we have a longer list. Basically, the most crucial part is we have large deficit financing. And as you know, there has been a fiscal reform that has been approved in Mexico a couple of months ago. And that fiscal reform and that economic package includes to live with fiscal deficit for the next 5 years, 1.5% of GDP of deficit. If you see, our ratio of debt GDP supports that. That's not the problem. The problem is that it's a large amount of money that you have to finance in the markets of debt, national or international. Now that there is less liquidity in the markets, domestical and international, it's going to be very difficult to finance this amount of deficit. So the private sector, who is also competing for funding, right, is going to have a crowding out effect. So the Mexican government, in order to allocate this amount of deficit, will be crowding out the privates for funding, and the interest rate are going to go up. So that's a problem that we have to face and to address. The other problem, the tax revenues below expectation. That, I think that they overestimate this fiscal reform. They are going to collect less money than they are expecting, and that is going to be reflected in a higher deficit, reduction of public spending, and fragility of public finances. Internal risks, lack of accountability, transparency, and public spending. The implication is corruption, institutional fragility, and more important, if you believe in Keynes, the Keynesian multiplier in Mexico, in this case, my belief is that probably will be less than 1. So instead of multiplying the income in Mexico, probably is going to be reducing it. Because, why? Because there's a lot of corruption, and it's impossible to absorb this amount of public spending with the Mexican structure right now. If we want to spend more, we have to make an administrative reform before doing that. Fourth, slow recovery of the housing sector. Economic growth rates lower. The housing sector in Mexico is crucial. It's one of the most dynamic sectors of the Mexican economy. It accounts for more than 1.5% of economic growth. And the housing sector in Mexico has a very bad year this year. So that's why we only grew 1.3%. The other 1.5% of economic growth just stopped. So now the new government claimed that they will put together again the construction of houses in Mexico, but it's like a train. Once you stop the train, it's going to take some time to make it advance full speed again. So probably it's not going to be as fast as they expect. Important risk, the lousy implementation of the telecom and energy reforms. This is very important. We have amended the Constitution to reform the legal framework in the telecommunication sector and in the energy sector. This is a very good thing for Mexico. But if we do not complete this with very good regulation in the secondary laws, Mexico will be missing a great opportunity to increase productivity and competitiveness. Fragility of local public finances. The local public finances in Mexico depends a lot on the federal government, and that it's an important risk for the Mexican economy. Why? In terms of democracy, the governors they show a complete submission to the federal government. That's not a very good institutional design for a democracy. And furthermore, there could be a possible bailout. Some of the state-level governments are highly indebted, and there is no clear that they are going to have enough money to pay for that. So the possibility of a bailout from the federal government exists, and that's a huge risk. And again, natural disasters. Mexico is destiny of 2 or 3 hurricanes per year, and it's very costly to reconstruct infrastructure, and that devotes a lot of resources to the reconstruction of infrastructure in those places, and that's also one risk of the Mexican economy. The forecast for Mexico. Well, the forecast for Mexico, as you see, in the left part is from 2010 to 2012. That's the growth rate in Mexico and the comparison with the United States. The forecast, 2013, I put it in the side of the forecast because the definitive data have not been published. Okay, so 1.3 for Mexico, 1.6 for the United States, and then our forecasts go up to 3.9, 4.7, and 4.9. Right? This includes the reforms that have been embraced in Mexico. Okay, so as you see, I I'm very optimistic with the reforms that are embraced in my country, but I think that they are good because they are updating the structure of the Mexican economy, but they are not going to translate in huge economic growth rates. If you see, including the reforms, we will go back again to the 5% of potential economic growth. Without the reforms, probably our potential growth rate will be 2 or 3%. So the reforms were very good, but we have to do not oversell it. Mexico very hardly is going to grow more than 5%. That is, 5% is good, 4% is good. Believe me, it's a very good economic growth rate. So, what is the challenge for the Mexican economy? How are we going to make it grow faster? Well, again, good news. Everything that is in the textbooks, everything that has been taught to you in your macroeconomics courses is right. The production function is real, works. Whatever is your functional form of your preference, you see, this is output, this is capital, this is labor, and this is knowledge or technology, right? There is no way out from this equation. If you want an economy to grow, you have to accumulate capital, you have to accumulate labor, you have to be able to have innovation and technology in your economy, and you will have to have the correct institutional design to make all these things work, and from any mix from it, obtain the maximum outcome possible. What are we doing? In terms of human capital, Mexico has been investing in the last 20 years in education, in health, improving living conditions, and alleviating poverty. In terms of physical capital, I'm talking about infrastructure, transportation, telecommunication, and energy. In terms of labor, skilled and healthy labor force, and to make the labor markets in Mexico more flexible than they were before. In terms of technology, there's also a huge agenda here: research and development, agencies and acceleration funds, technology-intensive processes. In terms of institution, we have to improve rule of law, the financial system, to have a functional democracy, to have economic competition, and to have security in Mexico. What have we done investing in people? Investing in people, you can see, these are data from 2000 to 2011. We have increased, well, the primary enrollment is almost 100%. We have an important advance in secondary enrollment from 55 to 67, and we have a very good advance in the higher education enrollment from 19% to 28%. And this was done probably in the last 5 years. So I think that there's a window for opportunity for this indicator, and Mexico has to keep advancing. In terms of health coverage, Mexico 2 years ago reached universal coverage with respect to health. That is that almost any Mexican in Mexico have access to health services. Okay? Okay? Don't ask me about quality. That's true. But at least, okay, that's the second derivative for this. So, but there is health coverage for almost everyone. What do we have? We have 43% and 9% of the formal social security. This is the formal social security, IMSS and ISSSTE, right? We have 1% of social security for Pemex and the armed forces, and then we have this 48% that accounts for what is called the Seguro Popular. It's a government program that insures people that do not have access to the formal social security, right? So with this, we have the 100%. It has probably a lot of things to be fixed. Of course it is, but it gives you a very good base to keep advancing and to really provide health services to everyone in Mexico. What happened with infrastructure? We have devoted a lot of resources to infrastructure. In Mexico, we are investing right now more than the average of the OECD countries. From 3.3 is the average in the OECD, and we're investing 4.6%. Of course, we are so lagged in this indicator that we have to invest more than the developed countries. Of course it is, but at least we realize it and we are doing it. And what is going to happen with the constitutional amendments in telecommunications? I think this is going to be a boost for the economy because we are going to have broadband availability to almost every region in the country. We are going to have competitive rates. We are going to have competition. We are going to have no limits for foreign direct investment in telecommunications and satellites. And we are going to have up to 49% of foreign direct investment in broadcasting. With respect to energy, we are considering private participation in all activities: upstream, downstream, transportation, storage, distribution, electricity. Everything is going to be open. We are going to have a sovereign fund to manage all revenues. That claims that gradually we are going to create a fund, and the money allocated in this fund is going to be devoted to construct infrastructure in the rest of the country. That is a little bit a way to avoid that the revenues from the oil go to, to finance bureaucracy, higher salaries or whatever, and it goes to construct infrastructure. We are going to have best practices in Pemex. We are going to transform Pemex in a real corporation, and we are going to strengthen the regulatory bodies of the energy sector. What happened with investing in innovation? I think that we haven't done not too much with respect to innovation. We have been able to adopt technology. That is why Mexico has manufactured that high technology, but only to adopt. We haven't gone the next step to adapt and to create and to design and to develop technology. So there's agenda best practices that has to be done, that we have to promote technological clusters, to have more engineers, to have apprenticeship programs, to have a venture capital market, to have a efficient patent system. And I think that there's a lot of room to improvement on that. You can see that Mexico is very well behind the rest of the countries of the OECD. With respect to strengthening institutions, well, the financial sector is very strong, is very well capitalized, but there are some things that has to be done. It has to be easier to execute guarantees in the banking system. So it could be cheaper to lend money, and it would be easier to obtain a credit. We have to advance in the legal framework for banking bankruptcy that we haven't, well, now we have it, but not 1 year ago. With respect to rule of law, we have to empower the judicial system, and we have advanced having now an autonomous general attorney. Our democracy, finally we have legislative re-election. Mexico and Costa Rica, I think, were the only two countries that has an acceptable democracy that didn't have re-election in the legislative branch. Now in Mexico we have approved re-election for the legislative branch, and also at the locality level with major re-election. Economic competition, we also strengthened the antitrust laws. So basically, this is the diagnostic, this is the risk, the risk atlas for Mexico, and this is the agenda that we have been advancing in, and the agenda for the future in Mexico. And let me finish with some final remarks so we can have some comments. Mexico is a very strong emergent economy. But Mexico is a very strong emergent economy, not by miracle. It's a very strong emergent economy because we have done a lot of effort and a lot of sacrifices in the last 25 years. The only way to create solid, stable economic growth is to have discipline, to be prudent, to be orthodox handling the economy. That's the only way to do it. There are no easy way out from this. There are no magical tricks for this. You have to be patient, and you have to be willing to do the effort that you have to do it to handle an economy. So the Mexican moment or the Mexican miracle is not such that thing. This is the outcome of 25, 30 years of good and sound economic policy in Mexico. And if you are taking decisions in terms of finance or economics, the market darlings are not necessarily a good investment in the long term. It's always better to pay attention to the fundamentals of the economy, to get away from charismatic leaders, to get away from fads, and to invest in the country that has the better fundamentals for the long run. And I'm going to stop here and willing to take any questions that you have. Thank you very much. Yeah.
I was wondering, what is the economic impact of undocumented migration to the U.S. and how does it impact economic stability in Mexico?
Well, again, this is an academic auditorium, so well, I think that migration from Mexicans to the United States has a lot of different angles, and it's very difficult to quantify a precise economic effect here. Well, first, it's like it has a positive effect because some of the income of these migrants go back to Mexico. Right? So that means that some dollars go back to the Mexican economy, and that helps support families in Mexico, and that at some point was a very important source of dollars for the Mexican economy. Second position just after oil at some point. So it has that effect on the exchange rate, and also with respect to increase the level of income in some families in Mexico. I think it alleviates a lot of social pressure that otherwise would be building in Mexico because we don't have enough jobs for these Mexicans and cross the border and get those jobs here in the United States. So also in terms of social fabric, it helps because we were able to take them back. In terms of long-term human capital accumulation, I think that Mexico was not benefit at all because of that. Because if you see the people that crossed the border were very entrepreneurial, some of them, very brave people who crossed the border were not, without knowing the language, and just crossed the border in very complicated situation. And some of them, or most of them, were able to survive and to generate some income. So it's people who has a lot of, let me put it in this way, entrepreneurial characteristics. And that's the human capital that you need in a country like Mexico. So our best generation, because some of them were educated in the public system, some of them has secondary education. Our best generation crossed the border and migrate to the United States. So in terms of human capital, Mexico loses a lot from that. Some of them, or most of them, are coming back to Mexico right now. I think that right now, the migration net rate in the net is close to zero because of the economic conditions in the United States. And so, I mean, now the migration the flow is not so high as it was in the past. So I think it's very difficult to quantify in terms of GDP how much come from the migrants. But I think that Mexico at some point has to be able to generate enough jobs to prevent educated people to cross the border and look for a future in another country and stay in Mexico and generate jobs and generate income in Mexico.
Do you think that AMLO's continued popularity will ever threaten the kind of sound financial management that you said has helped Mexico so much in the last 30 years?
Whom? The popularity of whom? AMLO?
Andrés.
Andrés Manuel. Andrés Manuel, for those of you who are not well aware of this individual, is a very charismatic leader from the left in Mexico. And he has chameleonical political positions. And he is not very reliable in terms of public opinion with respect of this. And he has been transforming himself. At the beginning, he was very aggressive with his position, and he was very passionate about his positions. Then he realized that he was losing support in the Mexican public, and he began transforming and portray himself like a very, very moderate center politician, right? And he reinvented himself, but nobody really believed him that he was being reinvented. He's very popular. He was the runner-up in the 2006 election, and he was the runner-up in the 2012 election. And he's getting ready for the 2018 election. So I think that it's going to be very difficult for him to convince the electorate in Mexico that he is reliable and that he understands how to handle an economy. So my personal opinion, is he a threat for this? Yes, he is. And also, this took 25 years to construct in Mexico or in any country. To destroy this, it takes 6 months. Yep.
Can I really have to, I'm very sorry that I have to stop the questioning because Senator Cordero has to get a plane up at JFK. And since the weather is not very good, we have to make sure that he is getting into a car to get to the airport on time. So I really beg your indulgence that we can't have him answering questions longer, but I'm sure you'll agree with me that in the time he had with us, he did a tour de force and the amount of information he gave. Please join me in thanking him for his time.
Thank you. Thank you very much, guys.